So before I give an introduction for our speaker, I do want to just mention a few housekeeping notes. So one is that if you'd like closed captioning, you can go down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you will see an option for closed captioning. And so if you click on that little up arrow, you can hit show subtitles and it'll show the closed captioning. And if you click into like subtitle settings, you can even change the font sizes and things like that. If you would also turn off your video during the presentation so that our attention can be put on Mr. Gerwin, that would be wonderful. And then also at the end of the session, if you would like to join the lunch session and just socialize with some folks that are attending, we will have Bryles put the A session Zoom link back in the chat because you will have to leave this chat because we're in the B session to go back to the lunch session. So I think that is all of the housekeeping notes I want to be sure of. Oh, and then if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat and Mr. Gerwin will answer them throughout the presentation. I'll make sure he sees those as well. So yes, I'm going to give his introduction. And by the way, my name is Percia Swift. I work at the North Carolina Museum of History. I am the Assistant Volunteer and Group Programs Coordinator, and I'm so happy that all of y'all could be here today. This morning's speaker is John Gerwin. He is an ornithology research curator and educator at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, where he's worked since 1988. He studies elements of the life cycle of birds when he's outside. Inside, he oversees the museum's bird research collection with the help of an assistant curator. Together, they have worked with teenagers for the past 15 years, engaging them in the many facets of museum and field-based ornithology work. John's own future was set after he participated in a junior zoology club at the Cincinnati Zoo during his teen years. His presentation today is titled, Using Birds, Dead or Alive, with Teenagers, Very Alive, to Teach Science, Education, and Teamwork. So welcome, John. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Well, thanks everybody for being here and thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and start the screen sharing, and it always takes a minute or so to bring it up. Let me know if and when you see things.
Yes, we can all see this.
All right. All right. Well, so yes, I will be focusing on our work with young folks for the last 15 years. I've also had some interesting experiences with some slightly older ones, so I put as younger and younger. And I learned over time that they'd been through some real challenges in their lives. And over, they kept telling me how important it had been for them to work with birds or to work at the museum, to work with I and my assistants. And so I sent a note out a couple of weeks ago and asked if any of them wanted to say anything, and I got back a handful of commentary. So I'm going to intersperse that throughout the program. So I wanted to give a little bit about what is the bird unit and who am I. But to start with the bird unit, so we are a research collection. So what I oversee is specimens that are used by different scientists for the kinds of projects they do. We mostly do the things on the right you see are your traditional stuffed bird. We call them study skins, and they have data. But over the years, we've also preserved a lot of bone elements and eggs. We have a lot of associated wings that go with some of these specimens, one of the largest spread wing collections in the country now. And then I maintain a subset of material for doing educational outreach programming. And so what does that mean? What do people do with them? A couple of things here, a couple of examples. There's a fellow at UNC who's been scanning all those wings in, because now we have some sophisticated computers and software to do 3D scanning, and he can do studies of what he's doing up here, the functional morphology of gliding flight. It's interesting stuff like that. Traditionally, there would be a study of just simple morphology, but it gets more and more complex each year. We have paleontology people who come and archaeology people to look at our bones. So here's a couple of examples of studies using our bone specimens. A typical series of one bird, which is, so we will keep series of one species, large series of specimen because of all this kind of variation, the sort of thing that people study. And so we also have nests and songs, field data, photos, and of course tissues now, because a lot of people are looking at genetics or environmental contamination. Another example of what some folks did over the years, we have this series of a seabird. It's called a petrel. It's like a little albatross. We have the largest series really in the world. It's a bird that forages off the coast of North Carolina, but nests in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It's considered endangered, and my former boss noticed a little difference in the pattern of their faces, but didn't do any more with it. And then these two fellows came along and visited the collection for several days and did all their measurements, and they concluded that they think there's really two species out there. And then a student came up from UNC Wilmington, and he asked to take skin samples off of these birds. So we let him take toe pad samples, and he got some DNA out of it. And he agreed that there's some differences in the population. So that means there's another species out there, but we don't know where it is, somewhere in the Caribbean islands. So the hunt is on. There are people working on that. So it's an interesting use of specimens. And some of these are 40, 50-year-old specimens. We have artists who regularly visit or borrow material. We have some things that we can ship to them. We do ship things to other researchers as well. There's a woman from Salisbury. She's the assistant director of the Art Institute in Salisbury, and she does paper cuts. And here she's using some spread wings to get patterns, and she makes large murals and does some interesting work. She's been to the museum half a dozen times. And then we do work outside. So yeah, we're the dead bird people, but we also do live bird studies. And that, in our case, like Brian and I, my assistant Brian and I, we catch birds, we tag them, and then try to study how they use the habitat or how they move about. And then in order to understand the habitat, we will be taking measurements in the habitats. This is a way to get anybody involved, including our young volunteers. And birds are popular with the public. So that makes us popular with the public, the bird unit staff. We get asked to do a lot of programming, both PowerPoint stuff as well as taking a trip in the field. So we try to do as many as we can. And so all of these topics, and inside, outside, these are ways you can engage the public. And again, about 15 years ago, I had been working with graduate students mostly, and a few undergraduates. And then I decided to work with teenagers and integrate them into stuff that we do. And that's what I'm going to be going through is some of the tasks that we do out in the field and just some of the challenges involved in that. One of the great things about mixing them up is that these, we're here, this is a pretty big group. It's not always this large of mixture in the lab, but it might be 4 or 5 people, but it's a mix of ages. And then we all learn from each other, but the young ones can talk to the older ones about things in life, maybe college classes, career trajectories, things like that, as well as a lot of science, just a lot of science dialogue back and forth. I have helped, I wouldn't say that I have a lot of experience in either with the youth or dealing with some of the challenges that the young kids brought to me. But I've been fortunate when I got to the museum to work on a couple of grants that sort of related. We've had several grants to work with underserved youth, troubled youth, and 4 different grants where they use nature. And we have a property called the Prairie Ridge Eco Station just on the edge of Raleigh. It's about 35, 40 acres, open space. It's a safe space, and we take the public. I take the kids out to do training. We take the public to do these programs, and our educators like to do bird stuff whenever we can, and I'm happy to help out. So I've spent several days on each of those 4 grants that we had to work with these different groups. So that gave me a little experience in, working with, say, some different kinds of challenges, understanding things. And then, so working with the kids, I just became interested through a bit of an accident, and I just started providing different opportunities. I generally work with when they're age 12. I try to get to know them, and then as they get a little older, I'll bring them into field and lab work. I've worked with 10 and 11. I have one right now, 10 years old. There's a reason for that. I'll show at the end, but normally it's 12 and up. So how did I get started? As was mentioned, I was fortunate to be a junior zoologist. I I was interested in birds, my mother said, since the time I was 3 years old. My oldest sister, 9 years older, was in high school, and our high school zoology teacher made people learn 10 common birds in the neighborhood, and I used to follow her around. And she let me follow her around to learn the same 10 birds. And then 2 years later, I was invited to join this club. I was age 11. So from age 11 to 14, I was in childhood heaven, surrounded by 25 or so other nerdy little kids like me, all interested in nature and coming from the greater Cincinnati area. And they took us out every weekend. And then we had to do activities, and we had to do projects and stuff like that. And a number of the chaperones at the time interested in birds, and so it kept happening. It kept circling back to birds, and then I ended up going to the University of Minnesota for my undergraduate, Louisiana State for my graduate work. Then I came here, and I've been here since, so a little over 32 years. I did learn Spanish early on. That turned out to be a really good skill because I've been invited to work in 10 different countries, especially in Nicaragua. And as I'll show you near the end, I took a couple of these kids with me one year to Nicaragua. I was always interested in flight and the idea of a bird's eye view. So back in the day, my oldest sister was also married to a fellow who was a skydiver, and I used to tag along when I was a kid. And then when I got to be old enough, I was 17. I got permission. I conned my parents into letting me start jumping out of airplanes. And then I ended up doing it for 20 years. I became an instructor. But I guess you could say that I was always willing to take a little bit of a calculated risk, which I think working with teenagers was definitely, especially in the field, and taking them on all these trips was definitely some of that. Well, one thing leads to another, and when I got to the museum, I didn't have a lot. Again, I didn't have a lot of experience working with youth, just a little bit in high school. But I got to the museum. I started working with our junior curator program. That's the only program we had at the time. And here's one of our JCs. And this is the kind of stuff that, I wanted to take them into. And so I had to get permission and parental permission, explain everything. I have help from a fellow for the last 25 years. That's Keith. And he helps me also chaperone the kids. And he's a good bird bander. So I'll tell you what that is in just a second. And right about the time that Marissa was coming along, we were contacted by a young woman who she attended a museum program out near Charlotte, and she told the educator, "I want to be an ornithologist." And they asked us to contact her. I talked to her mom, and Becky at the time was my assistant, and we agreed to take her on. So she was sort of our first one in the field, and then Marissa, the JC, came along. They actually spent a bit of time together. So Becky and I spent 4 years with this one and learned a lot from that. And I think I'm going to, so she was the first one in the field, and right before her, there was a fellow that worked in the collections up. Actually, I guess I'll mention that after we had Amber around for a year or so, Becky and I were working with Wake Audubon. We were on the board of Wake Audubon, a local Audubon chapter. So we had experience with the JCs and with Amber. So we said, why don't we start our own youth group with Wake Audubon? And we pitched that to the board, and they agreed. They liked the idea. We had several people on the board at the time who were also educators. And so we just started this youth group, word of mouth, just to take kids out once a month, just to get them outside looking at nature stuff. That's where I met some of these other kids. But I'm gonna read a little bit about what one of the kids sent to me. One of the first kids I took on at the museum was right after I got there. I was asked to take on one of the staff members' kids to chaperone him for the summer, and I was told it might be a little bit of a challenge, but it turned out to be actually a really wonderful thing. He was a very gifted young man. But he wrote to me, growing up, I was very fortunate to be the son of a museum exhibits curator. It was a time when the world was a lot less stressful. I was able to volunteer, during which I learned from very experienced people how to safely handle some rather grumpy reptiles and to prepare avian scientific specimens. Yes, I stuffed a lot of birds, and I learned a lot of anatomy. It was an adolescence that was an escape from the humdrum of daily life that for me was somewhere between a National Geographic adventure and Neverland. Many of the people I met became friends. I became friends with were just as interesting as Captain Hook. These experiences were simply not available to those who did not seek them out. This is a shame, as they offered a time during which I could disengage from the normal daily stresses of life. I did not realize it at the time, but it was a sort of therapy that helped me become who I am today. From academic and professional career, I chose a life in medicine, a decision I'm thankful I made. It has brought me deep personal satisfaction, along with a few saves over the last 2 decades. But I miss and look back fondly on my time spent in natural sciences. I can say one thing with confidence: when the time comes to scale back my professional career, the natural science world is where I plan to return. Let's see if I can get this going. So through the Young Naturalist Club, I met these 3 women. They were around for about a year. And then they came to me and they said, we really want to do bird stuff, more focused bird stuff. So I brought them to the museum. I decided to take them on. And this is really after Amber and Marissa, this is when I really decided to focus. And Emma was 12 and these twin girls were 14 when they came on. And so we learned all the stuff in the lab, stuff in birds, and then the collections, how to do collections management stuff. And when we did public programs, which they would help me do, other kids would see. We had, family events, other kids would see and they'd want to join. And so I would carefully take on a few more. So Elena came, and Edward was a junior curator at the time, and he jumped ship and came over to us. And so one thing led to another. And we just got more and more involved. And so it has been a great way to get them involved in stuff in the collections. It's what they often tell me is just how peaceful it is to work in the collections, but also it's a way to contribute to a bigger cause with collecting data, collecting science stuff, and just learning the protocols and the mechanics. One of the parents wrote to me because we had a couple of her boys were working with us. It's not these 2; it's some others that have now graduated from college. But she wrote. Since a very early age, the boys were fascinated by science, nature, and art. When we were moving from Germany to the US, they were about 12 and in a real state of panic, saying that we could not move to North America because they did not know the North American species. I found it nearly impossible to keep up with providing them material because they would absorb everything as soon as I brought it into the house. It became a huge disappointment to me that they had been referred to as having disabilities. We had to spend much effort from the time they became school age, working with teachers, professors, administrators, and employers to work with them. There are really no clear diagnoses or that make full sense, although they have been through a number of these: ADHD, Asperger's, autistic spectrum, even highly gifted. But just so that there was some official and legal leverage that could be used to get people to make accommodations so that these kids could get through school and a college degree. So they did go through the Young Naturalist program, and then they did go through our Junior Curator program. And she has a little bit more to say that I'll say at the end. So when we're stuffing a bird, there's a lot of details involved, and there's equipment, there's sharp equipment, and there's chemicals. And so we have to teach these kids all those parts. They're gonna be there's well over 100 steps involved in skinning out a bird, collecting the data, and then trying to stuff it and make it look nice. So it's a combination of science and art. And that's something that the people all tell me that they really enjoy about doing this element of work. It's sort of modified taxidermy. They're not making them lifelike, but there is an artistic element to it. And the kids take to it really well. And then this is what we call banding. It's tagging or ringing a bird. We have these, I'll show you some pictures of the things we put on birds. We catch them, we tag them, and release them. And it's a way of studying them. It's very appealing to people, whether they're participating in doing it, like Emma here or Vanessa, or whether they're coming to watch, as here they are here. And we can let kids hold the bird to release them. It's a safe way to do it. First Lady Cooper came to check out our study site in the Uwharrie. She's a big bird aficionado. Why do we do what we do? Well, there's a lot of reasons to do the studies that we do. And the point is that when our volunteers are helping out, we're putting it into the bigger scientific context. So we might be participating in some of these, or we might be assisting somebody else doing some of these. And we're always bringing in the science element to what these kids are doing, why they're doing what they're doing. This is what the rings look like. So it contains a 9-digit number. Each bird will get it. It's unique, like a social security number. We can also add colored plastic rings for specific studies if we want there, put on in a unique combo. And then that way, if we see the bird later on, we don't have to catch it again to get the number. We can tell who the bird is. So a couple of examples of species we've done that with. And I've had the kids involved in one study, this bird, where we put these different colored tags on, and they were to go out and try to see their feet and figure out who was who. How do we catch a bird? Well, there are different ways to do it. I mostly use nets. They're called mist nets because they're fine, almost like your hair. They stretch out like a volleyball net. And so they look a little bit misty when they're hanging up like this. You can see they're hard to see, and against the vegetation, nearly invisible. So the bird flies along, gets caught. So these kids have to learn how to take the net out of the bag, put it up, how to put it back in the bag, where to put it, right habitat, all this stuff. And again, we are able to do this over at Prairie Ridge. Been a great training ground. And then I can take these kids out to do some of the other projects that we work on. And again, Keith has been a big help over the many years. If I've got a conflict with a schedule, he was able to fill in, or if I had more kids than I could handle, he could come and help out. And he and Becky did a lot of that stuff early on, but Keith is still around helping me. So the birds fly in, they get caught in the net, they sink into a little pocket. We come along to take them out. That they're going to struggle, but that entangles them a bit. So the kids have to learn to take the bird out undamaged. It's a little stressful for everyone, but it's a good experience for the people involved, not so much for the birds. But there they are, learning how to delicately get the bird out, get it back over to the banding station where we process them and record all the data. And then the next thing we do is get them going. So the first thing is to get the band on, get the ring on, and get the number down, the date and time. But after that, there's a whole bunch of information that we record. There's a thick guide, it's our little Bible, and it's pretty complex. And these are just some of the things that we teach them to do. And they do it. You know, again, how do you explain it to a 14-year-old? There are different ways, of course. They learn differently. And when there's more than one, if I have 2 or 3 kids around, once one learns, they can help teach the other ones, when the newer ones, how to do what we do. But it's a lot of stuff that we ask them to do. I've been very impressed with how well they do with something like this. Then the bird is done, and we're ready to send it off. So again, different ones have experienced some different challenges. One of my technicians, about 12 years ago, worked on this bird, and she got a job. A few years later, she contacted me about doing some volunteer work with the same bird, just continue doing some of this work down on the coast. And so I had to do the paperwork and permitting and all that stuff and set her up, and been going on really well. And then she ran into a problem, so she had to take a couple of years off, and then she came right back as soon as she could. It was really important to her, and she wanted to say a few words. So I'll read her commentaries. I've been through a few rough years lately, and birding has been such a peaceful and wonderful escape for me. My son was born with severe medical issues. She actually gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The girl was fine, but the son was born with severe medical issues. And while we had only 18 months to spend with that beautiful boy, it was emotionally and physically draining, taking care of his medical needs around the clock. He was hospitalized 15 times, and we witnessed thousands of his seizures. It was difficult to take personal time for myself, but I knew I had to. It was best for my family, and so I took some short bits away. And when I did, birding was my favorite way to find peace. I could do it anywhere, in my backyard, parking lots, hospital windows, or alone, or with friends. I could go out on a whim or quietly read about them while the kids were sleeping. Birds are such calming, interesting, marvelous creatures that provide simple entertainment and joy. And birding helps stimulate my tired brain, relieve my stress, challenge me to keep learning about something I love. And again, within a couple of months after the boy passed away, she was emailing me about she was ready to get back to being able to do this study and get back to it because it was a way to keep moving forward. And she takes her daughter with her. Other ways that we tag birds, there's some other ways we tag and track them. I've had the kids do a little bit of this stuff. I'll show you some examples. Here's what a radio transmitter looks like. It's a tiny little unit, 0.5 gram to 1 gram. We can put on a bird. It beeps. It beeps at one frequency. We can take a receiver out with an antenna, find the bird. We note the location with GPS. So I got the kids involved in doing a couple studies with this. They learn how to put the harness on, for to catch it, put the harness in the transmitter on, and then get the gear and go out and get the data. Working in the Uaris, I work in the Uaris. That's one of my project sites. That is southwest of Raleigh here. So it's about a 12-county region where the zoo is, Morrow Mountain State Park. And I'm right in the middle. I have a study site right here, and I've done some work in the Uwharrie National Forest. And it's great because it's within 2 hours. I can be there from Raleigh. I did a couple of summer camps with the kids, week-long summer camps, and then I do these bird banding project. I always take time with them to journal. I encourage them to journal and to do some artwork. I'll show you a little artwork at the end that they came up with. This is our study site in Uwharries, which is a lot like Prairie Ridge. So it's a meadow prairie type of habitat, and we're studying the birds in both places and comparing. So when we're out there on that project, these girls and Edward, they helped me set it up 6 years ago. They helped me set this up. So they were teenagers, and except Edward was 19, so he was my adult chaperone at the time. And then they get to meet other adults involved in the project, like a woman from Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, they get to talk to these people about their careers, how did they get there, as well as scientific questions. And it's a very useful way, a lot of osmosis, a lot of conversation, and they learn things by osmosis that way. They spent a lot of days, what I call this unpaid labor. We would camp 2 or 3 days at a time every month or every 2 months to set this project up and start getting the data. And again, Edward had to help out sometimes to be my adult chaperone if I couldn't find someone else. That's one of the challenges of being out with teenagers. You got to have some extra adults around. So people are always willing to help out when they were available. And then we catch a lot of sparrows out there and a Prairie Ridge. So we're collecting data. And these are a couple of sparrows we worked on. And for the kids, it was exciting to see some of the graphs that come about. So for example, here's at Prairie Ridge with the song sparrows, how they occur throughout the year. And to see a pattern like this and to see that it's multi-years of data. And most of those kids, especially those early ones who are still around helping, that it's pretty thrilling for them to see results like that. And here's a graph of the different kinds, 6 of the sparrows that we catch in the Uwharrie, 6 different species, and how their abundance is compared to one another. So again, they get a lot of satisfaction out of contributing to this. And actually, one of my other volunteers, she's one of the older ones, and she has worked on this project a lot. But she also wanted to comment. She said, I came into this field a lot later than most, and I had a lot of anxiety about switching focus and starting over, a field that favored the young, and which, it's just true. Well, at least I was. One that favored people who could take volunteer opportunities and who were free to travel and didn't already have adult life constraints. I took the jump because I became passionate about the idea of this as a career. In fact, the Nicaragua trip was the biggest catalyst for me. She went on one of my eco tours to Nicaragua. It was my first real tangible experience with the possibilities of what this field could offer. But once I graduated, I struggled to find my place in it. I needed experience to get a paying job, but I wasn't in a position to get that experience by working for months on end with no pay. Therefore, I quickly realized that this is also a field that heavily favors more privileged people and those from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. So I had to take the long route, working on small projects and local opportunities when and where available. And she did take the long route. It took her about 5 years. During those first few years after graduation, I grappled with frequent feelings of self-doubt, depression, and anxiety. But nature has always been therapy for me. I love this work, and I'm confident that without the opportunity to work with John and his museum crew, that I wouldn't have been able to stick with it. And she has stuck with it. She's actually she's on her 3rd part-time job doing bird work, probably be going to graduate school in next year. Ashley's one of the kids that's been hanging around the museum for a long time. She's now at NC State, her first year. And but in her senior high school year, she asked if she could go beyond volunteering, beyond stuffing birds. Could she do a project? She's interested in lab work. She's interested in genetic type stuff. And we have a genetics lab at the museum. And so I partnered everybody up and they agreed to take her on. And I agreed to show her how to take blood from a bird because I was interested in all those sparrows. We can't tell the males from the female. They all look alike. So I said, let's pick the song sparrow and a white-throated sparrow. We catch so many and take blood and see if you can figure out who's who. And it's interesting. So here she is. She learned to take blood and she's shown these young girls who were at the study site that day, fascinated by, somebody taking blood. And she actually went into the literature. So again, a senior in high school is out there on the internet in the library, getting a primary scientific literature, reading about why would we do something like this. It turns out that, males and females might migrate differently, or they use different habitats, even microhabitats, for example. There's some suggestion that they might be in the same field, but in slightly different parts of the field, segregated by sex. And you wouldn't know unless you know what the sexes are. So that's what she was trying to look at. And so she got the blood and she got into the lab and she was running these gels, and then the pandemic hit. So, I mean, that's a shame, but she was starting to get the data and maybe we'll be able to finish it up one of these days. We obviously we have the samples and she's got the technology down. So anyway, it was an interesting thing to get started. So then again, coming back to habitat use, here's a bird that started to nest in North Carolina in the early 80s. And people have always wondered about that. So at one point, I was asked to come up and do some work. At the time, I just didn't have time. I didn't have people. I didn't have money. And then 4 years later, I had these kids who knew what to do. So I said, you know what, why don't we go up to the mountains and do this as well? So here's one of our tagged birds with a radio transmitter on. And here's what the bird looks like up close. It's about a 30 gram. It's a migratory songbird. It nests up high. We're working above 4,500 feet. And so again, I had these kids, they were trained up. Again, the same twins here, and Emma and Edward here. And I got the younger ones to tag along and learn from the older ones. And off we went. We ended up spending 4 seasons up there, 3 to 6 weeks doing this work. The first year, 2016, we had to camp. I didn't have any lodging, so we had to go to the campground and camp for 3 weeks. That was in the Cielo Valley. So we're working in the Black Mountains, so we're working just below Mount Mitchell. By now, the twins are 18, so it's a relief when they get a little bit older, and we can treat them as adults. It was always, I had to keep track of all these logistics, and a lot to keep track of. But they did a great job. So they went out and caught these birds, put the harnesses on, put the transmitters on. They got the data. So here they are with their receivers and their antennas. And this is our study site just below Mount Mitchell, right off the Blue Ridge Parkway here. It's at 5,000 feet. This is what it looks like from afar, and this is what it looks like on the inside. You got to track the bird wherever that bird goes. If you want to find it, you got to go out and where it is and get those data points. And they did. They did this for 2 seasons, and then they went back and measured all these trees and other vegetation. So it was really something. And again, while we were there, we got to meet other biologists who came out to visit. I invited biologists from UNC Asheville, from the Wildlife Resources Commission. They came out, and anyway, that was another element of it. So here's just some of what they did: take all these points from the bird they were tracking and put it onto a map. And we're working on a publication right now. One of them, she just graduated from college. Her sister's about to, and Emma's a couple years younger. She'll be done soon. But they also wanted to put some GPS tags on a bird, and they did that. This is a device that records data, so you got to get the device back. It's meant to track birds over a long period of time, and they wanted to know about the migration. But we don't know if the bird's going to come back in any given year, but about half of them do come back. So this is a bird they tagged, and they caught it. They put the unit on, and then the pandemic hit, and then they went back. So in 2020, I wasn't allowed to travel up there, but they were. So they went up by themselves, and they caught the bird was back, and they were able to catch it again, and they were able to get the data, and it showed that the bird had migrated to South Alabama. And so again, that was just something they did almost on their own. A pretty exciting thing. And my other volunteer here is teaching them. She's knows computer mapping, and she was teaching them how to use the software that goes with the device. So again, we sit around, we talk a lot. There's a lot of discussion about science and career stuff and a little bit of journaling. And this is where they would meet other people who will come and visit. And then here's some of their artwork for that thrush that we were studying, the 3 different interpretations of some of the work we were doing to create a little group of kids. And then we did a couple of international experiences with them. Brian O'Shea is the current assistant curator, and he's worked here in Northeastern South America for over 25 years now, I think. So he's in Guyana and Suriname. He teaches a class, so it's sort of like what I do with summer camp. He does it for the whole summer. Kids come from around the world, those that can afford to, and they learn about tropical ecology, including this bird tagging stuff. But one year back in 2018, his assistant for that project had to drop out at the last minute, and he needed somebody. And I said, take one of our kids. And he said, oh God, I can't do that. These are college kids coming, and at the time Vanessa was I guess 18, but I said she knows what she's doing, she can handle it. So he took her down, and it worked out okay. It was a little awkward at first, he said, but then everybody realized that she did know what she was doing. She'd been with us for 4 years. She was quite good. Well, not only did it work out, but it worked out again and again. And so she just got back from her 3rd time there. Brian and her were just down there. They couldn't go last year because of the pandemic, but she went in the year before that, and then she went this year. She also works with the indigenous folks that are on their lands, helping them do some of the studies they do. And she's a Caldwell Fellow at NC State. She'll be finishing up this semester. She does all this unpaid. I've worked in Nicaragua, as I mentioned earlier. I had worked there for about 15 years, up until 2018, and then things imploded, the politics. And so I went back in 2019, but it really was too hard to keep working. And so I don't go back now. But while I was doing my work, it was a lot on sustainable coffee plantations, study birds, do ecotourism, and help the locals to become tour guides, learn some English. I did trips with NC State, Guilford College, and one with Catawba. I did one with Wake Audubon. So a lot of it had to do with what we call sustainable coffee, but also wildlife studies. But I was always working with either this bird or a couple of guys. This is the bird I studied when I was there. You can see it breeds here and just gets in Western North Carolina, and then it winters in Central America and North and South America. This is the coffee region of Nicaragua here in the mountains. And I mostly work with these 2 guys here in the middle. I've worked with them for 15 years, but I was teaching them how to be guides, how to work with the public, how to speak English, and just other things, knowing the birds and all that stuff. So I never had time to work with the women on the farm. And so that's why I brought these 2 down, because they speak Spanish. They're half Spanish. Their mother's from Spain. And so they knew Spanish. I said, come down and help me teach English as a second language. So they came down and volunteered for 7 weeks to teach English to the other staff, to help map the property. The property did not have a digital map. We mapped them, all the trails and all the coffee plots. And also they created these little bird guides for me, these little simple guide that the tourists could use to just identify the birds that come to the feeders. It's an eco lodge, and they feed the birds, and it's just 20 species. So I had the photos, and these 2 put it together in English and Spanish. It was a fun little project. And again, they're teaching English to the staff and helping me do some of the outreach that I did. We had a lot of groups that would visit the lodge when I was there. And so all of that had to be in Spanish. And since they spoke Spanish, they could help do those kinds of tours as well. So again, doing outreach is a big part of it. It all circles back. It's good for their professional development, but they love doing it, and it's a way of giving back. So again, Emma was started when she was 12, and whenever she's back in town, she comes to help do a program. This is one of our last grant-funded programs that we had at the museum to work with families in Southeast Raleigh. And again, we love to go out to Prairie Ridge and do the bird banding, bird ringing thing. It's a great way to get the kids involved, the families involved, and also our kids like to do the actual outreach. It's great. It really works well to have a sort of peer-to-peer discussion as well for learning. We find that these kids will react really positively to our kids who are doing the teaching. There's Ashley doing something with a Girl Scout troop. She's done stuff all over the museum, carts and Prairie Ridge, as well as things for state parks. We host Girls in Science. We usually have an afternoon in the collections. So I get my people down there to help do that. We did a little bit of extra work through Wake Audubon over at Walnut Creek. And so again, Ashley and the others were helping to do the bird banding and tagging and showing the kids how we do what we do. This one was an interesting one up here in the upper right. That is, you can see it's out on the mall, the Bicentennial Mall. I wanted to do something with our summer camp downtown. They don't have enough time at Prairie Ridge to do a lot of bird stuff. And so Laura asked me, is there anything we can do? And I said, let's do something on the mall. There's a lot of birds out there. If we can get permission to rope it off, we can try to catch a bird. So thank you to the History Museum for letting us do this a few times in the summer when such things are allowed. We hope to do it next year. We did it 2 summers. We do 3 sessions. We don't catch many birds, but that to the kids, that's not important. The really important thing is that we're trying and they're interacting and they're helping to do all this stuff. So that's been a fun thing too. So again, for me, I wasn't really sure what I was doing when I got into it. And I wasn't even sure what I was doing. I was really fortunate to be a junior zoologist. That definitely gave me some insight into what could be done. And then I was fortunate that my hobby became my job. And then I got support. I got support from, well, so the museum, Wake Audubon, colleagues who work with youth and gave me support and also gave me advice when I needed it. My wife is supportive. You know, there's definitely some risk involved running around with young kids around the state, taking them off for a week at a time. I put this change heart in quotes because I did have several heart surgeries about 10 years ago. And it was right after that I met those 3 young women. And so that's when I decided to switch from graduate students to work with teenagers. I mean, you just never know. You know, we were out banding pelicans. This is the pelican banding. And we're walking along, and Veronica, who'd been with us for a couple of years, stuffing birds, she sees a dead egret, and she says, "Oh, well, we're the dead bird people. We got to take it back." You never know. That's a pretty interesting reaction. Bless her heart. And then the pandemic hits, and everything was thrown into a real disarray. But you know, these kids are pretty resilient, and so after a year of lockdown, this is one of them who'd been with me with us for 4 years a lot in the lab and some at Prairie Ridge, a really good bird skinner, stuffer. And she emailed me and she just said, she was a senior in high school, and she just said, I got to get out and do some field work. So I said, well, you can, because we've been working in the URs this whole time. We have our protocols all worked out, a lot of bleach and Lysol and other and distancing, extra equipment. I said, you can come out and do stuff. And it's a big deal for her. This is the fun one because this woman here with her daughter, she was a junior curator at the museum about 25 years ago. I was working with him. She tells the story that I took him out and showed him an owl, and it really made an impression on her. And she ended up going into doing her master's on birds, but then got a job at the Wildlife Resources Commission. She's a wildlife biologist. She does some bird stuff as well as pollinator stuff and bumblebee stuff. And this is one of her daughters who they can come out. We go out once a month to do our work in the URs, and the kids come out. I wanted to read a little bit more real quick. The mom wrote to me, the second part of what she wrote was, she asked, so how have the programs with the museum and Audubon helped? Well, they've extremely instrumental in the positive social development of my sons. They merged the special intense interest with a social group where they could share interests, engage positively, and in a supportive environment, and where they were valued as individuals. For me as a parent, the Audubon Youth Group leaders, outings, and events were a real prayer answered. Other social groups at church and sports did not work out so well and made us feel unaccepted, and this hurt. Luckily, the boys, which are twins, always had each other, but I can imagine other kids like this, life can be very lonely. Other museum events, programs, and volunteer opportunities that followed the Audubon Youth Group continued the positive social development, feeling of inclusion, work skills, and self-esteem. So this included things like Bug Fest, volunteering in the summer, and of course, the Junior Curator program. These opportunities gave them very important work training. I always felt we were very lucky to get in on all the opportunities we did, and always wished that there would have been more for others so we would not need to compete. Here, the little, what looks like a requisite sunset shot. It's a sunrise shot over the parkway here. We're heading up to the Black Mountains, and then a shot, a true sunset shot in the Uaris. One of my former students sent me this little audio of her poem. It was nice. I'll play it for you if it comes through. I hope it does.
John, this is Albert. I can't hear it.
I'll bet you the
You may have to share your audio.
I'll bet you there's a setting. Where is share sound?
Michelle Lewis says sound does not come through if you have headphones on.
Returning
Does
to
it
the
come through
Birds
now?
by Mer Meitzelfeld. Difficult emotional situations have a
You
repulsive
hear it now,
effect,
Albert?
Yes.
making us want to run away and escape. We long for the restoration of safety and tranquility. During these times, I have found returning to the birds to be a soothing cure. I enter their world as I hold up my binoculars, noticing tiny details of pattern and behavior. My mind returns to a peaceful state as I am transfixed by wings, feathers, and movement. The stress and turmoil melts away as I step back into nature and find my true self again.
I'll leave you with one more, and this short little video I'll play in a second. But they, this one young gal wrote she went through a lot, so she wrote a little bit more personal stuff. She writes, I began working with John and Becky when I was 14 years old. The volunteer work I conducted as a teenager inspired me as a young person searching for a place in the world, and also directed the trajectory of my career path, a path I'm still on today. I was very quiet and shy in high school. I loved nature and all things outdoors, but had few friends who shared my passion. I spent a lot of time in the woods by myself with just field guides, identifying everything I could. I had no idea I could make a career out of this. I first learned to catch and tag many species of birds and educate the public during numerous trips to Prairie Ridge Eco Station. Later, I helped John and Becky in the mountains of North Carolina looking for woodpecker nests, in the swamps of South Carolina, tagging a aloof songbird. These experiences were instrumental in helping me get my first paid technician job a few years later. I have been conducting fieldwork ever since, and I'm about to finish my master's degree in avian ecology. So she started back in like 2004. So it's a little bit of a long road for her as well. Most young people get no such opportunity. John's work with teenage volunteers is unique. Not only did these opportunities help me establish the career of my dreams, they came during a very low point in my life. In high school, I felt that I didn't fit in. I struggled with depression, anxiety, and was diagnosed with OCD. Mental health issues are hard enough to deal with, especially when the world around you doesn't understand them. John and Becky provided just the opposite of that. They were understanding, patient, and kind. Many people thought I could not lead a normal life without medication, but I have. Having such exciting opportunities to work in the field redirected my focus and allowed me to heal. So through my work with John, I was able to grow in new and positive ways and become the person that I am today. Interestingly, she says, my guidance counselors at school were telling me that wildlife research was not a real job. It wasn't something you could make a career out of, but John and Becky showed me that that wasn't true, that you could. Again, John is kind and patient for those struggling with hardships, and it gave me the hope that my mental illness was not going to get in my way. When I worked in the field with John and Becky, I always felt encouraged and empowered. So, you know, it's sounds like a bit of a sales job, but really, like I said, I didn't expect all this when I got started. A lot of this came about later. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I'm glad I did. This is the 10-year-old of the former junior curator. We've asked her, she's been learning how to band birds with me for the last year. We caught a hawk one time. We don't ring the hawks. We just release them. But she really wanted to be the one to let it go. And but she's really catching on quite well. It's a little bit jolted there. Oh, it didn't quite show. It was a slow motion video of her releasing the bird, but it didn't quite come across. That's all right. She was thrilled to be able to hold that, let it go. So, oh, there it goes again. But anyway, that's all I have to say. I don't know if there's time for questions. I can't see my clock, but anyway, thanks again for having me.
John, that was such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. It was super inspiring also. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I have a question for you. How many students do you take with this junior curator kind of opportunity each year? And as the kids age up, do you like allow more kids into the program, or is it kind of just like a word of mouth sort of thing?
Well, it's a great point because I didn't really have a plan so I didn't really have a system. I thought, well, I'll just try it with those 3 girls and see what happens. And then one thing led to another. It kept happening. And I kept taking them on, and things I would say they got a little out of control, but then the older ones would start helping with the younger ones. So that worked out. But I kept expecting them to age out. And as I said, the 3 oldest ones are still kind of hanging around some. Like, for a while I had to start paying them. They were doing so much work and I had some money. But part of what they did was teach some of the younger ones. Some of them have gone on to college. It was just word of mouth. It was really kind of, like I said, it was kind of an experiment to see if this would even work at this level, which is pretty detailed level, doing the amount of lab work and the amount of field work. I just didn't know. Now I know it can be successful. If I had to do it again, I guess I would make it I'd be a little more proactive and try to reach different audiences, but it was just word of mouth. And, some of the kids would show up and I would just sort of assess whether I had time or whether I had enough help around who could help me help them. And so there hasn't really been a plan. But, with the pandemic, I mean, one thing about that is it's caused everybody to stop and reassess. So as things, come about, we decided we should cut back a bit, but I'm aging out. And so, I would love to see this sort of thing continue, but yeah, it'd be nice to reach different audiences too. I would love to reach out to different ones. As one of my, students pointed out, it's generally for more privileged folks. And so I'd love to be able to get a little bit of funding and reach different audiences to do this level. A lot of people do stuff that gets them outside, but to do this level of like doing actual research projects or the work in the collections that we do, I don't know of anybody that's doing that with teenagers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're giving them firsthand experience of what the field actually requires, which is amazing.
Yeah, and it worked out. Like I said, I didn't know how that was going to go, and there are definitely some challenges when you're driving around with a bunch of teenage girls in a state vehicle and all that, and you're camping, and parents need to know. But cell phones have helped with that. Having everybody has a cell phone, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been very interesting.
That's awesome. Well, you've got a lot of praise in the comments. No more questions, but a lot of praise. Some fellow birders who are inspired by your work and inspired by what you're doing with those kids. So again, thank you so much for joining us and presenting, because I learned a lot from you as well. And just again, housekeeping, in the chat, Bryles has dropped the link if you'd like to join the lunch session, which is again, just an opportunity. If you want to talk to some folks, socialize, you can, but if you want to take your lunch hour to yourself, that is also more than welcome. But again, you can also use that same link, that A link that Bryles put in the chat if you want to join an A session. But again, you can always go back to the flyer and click on which session you'd like to join after lunch as well. So thank y'all, and we hope you're enjoying today and get some lunch.
make a big contribution. So, you know, I talked to Eileen about this 2 years ago. Of course, the pandemic hit and everything stopped, but I've talked to Lynn about it. Maybe we'll get together with folks, you know, in a couple months and start and maybe try, you know, planning for that. So that's another audience. I think I didn't know it was such a big impact until these kids started telling me and some of the other students. So, but now I know that the museum is a very healing place for people in many different ways. That's a whole different element of what we do.
Well, John, because you've done so much work with teens and college students, as well as other interns, you know, when we have a planning session, I'm going to make sure that you get invited to share with us some of your experiences, and that might help us with determining, you know, future trajectories for our program at the museum.
Right.
So thank you.
It's been really helpful as a museum staff person who works with teenagers to have John also be a place within the museum that can host teens, because the programs that I run only have so much space, but this kind of additional overflow piece and just specialized interest within the student groups that we work with is just really great. And so it's been helpful over the years to have John and I partner on some things. He has questions and I have students, and so it works out really well.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that any museum could do this. It doesn't have to be natural science, you know. It seems like the museum world is where these kids or people with some struggle would like to be. So it could be the art museum or the history museum. That is just something that really is having those objects and contributing to like organizing and collecting data and putting things away and all that sort of thing. It really made a difference to them. So yeah, any museum could do it. So.
Great. And John, thanks again for letting us record you today too, because what that means is anyone that couldn't be here today, you know, the recording is going to have hopefully long-term impact on people that are thinking about how can they start a youth program or how can they expand their youth program. We can say, watch this video and get some ideas.
That's great.
Thank you. And thank you, Percia, for moderating this one. Awesome.
Of course.
Right, y'all.
All right.
All right. I'll see you guys around.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
definitely. And feel free to join the next after lunch sessions.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.